We spent quite a bit of time talking about exactly how we're going to build this application, so it's time to actually put pen to paper and start writing some code. Let's get started by opening up our code editor and starting up our development server. Now, I've already opened up my own code editor, so I'm just going to start up the server by running npm run start inside of our project directory. And then inside of my code editor, I'm going to find my index.js file inside of the src directory and open it up. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to just play around a little bit with React Router. The end goal that I want to have just inside this section is to create two different routes that a user can visit inside of our application. And based on the route or the URL that a user is visiting, I want to see slightly different content appear on the screen. So the first thing that we're going to do to make this happen is we're going to create two very small components that we're just going to make right now and then eventually delete very shortly after. So inside the index.js file, right above the React DOM.render call, I'm going to create these two separate components that we're just going to use for testing purposes. We're going to make both of them class-based components. So we'll say class hello extends react.component. And then we'll define just the render method inside of here. So we'll return a div that contains the text hello. Now I'm going to duplicate the same exact thing, paste it right beneath, and I'm going to change the text inside of this to be goodbye. So I changed the class name to goodbye, and I changed the div inside of it to contain the text goodbye as well. Okay, so there's our two very small test components. At this point, we've done absolutely nothing specific to React Router. So now we're going to start talking about exactly what we have to add to get React Router started up inside of our application. We're going to first start off by importing a couple different pieces of code from React Router, and then we're going to wire each of those up inside of the React DOM.render call. So let's go to the top of the file and get started. I'm going to flip up to the top of the file, and then we're going to add in an import statement, and we're going to import a couple different items from React Router DOM. The first thing we're going to grab is browser router. This browser router object right here is what interacts with the history library and decides exactly what to do based on a change inside the URL. The term browser router in particular is saying I want React Router to look at the entire URL when deciding what different components to show on the screen. And we'll definitely talk about some of the different aspects of this router later on. So for right now, we're just going to say that this is the piece of code that interacts with that history library. The next thing that we're going to import is the route component. So route right here is the real workhorse of all things React Router. This route object right here is a React component that we can render inside of any other React component that we put together inside of our application. The purpose of the route component is to provide that configuration that will say, hey, if the URL looks like this, then I want to show this component. And if the URL looks like that, then I want to show that component. So again, the route object or the route component is all about providing some customization or configuration to React Router. Now that we've imported these two objects and we've created our two components, let's wire them all up inside of the React DOM.render call at the bottom of the file. So I'm going to go back down to the bottom of the file. I'm going to delete the entire app tag for right now, so I don't want to show the app component at all. I'm just going to take it all the way out. I'm going to replace it instead with browser router. And I'll close off browser router like so. Next, we're going to create that configuration that I've mentioned a couple times now by making the two route components and mapping two instances of the route component up to each of the two test components that we put together. So I'm going to create an instance of route and another instance of route. Now there's two very particular and very important and required properties that we pass to every single route component that we create. The first is a prop called path, and the second is a prop called component. Path is almost always going to end up being a string. So it'll be a string that says, if a user goes to this route, then I want to show this component. And so in practice, the API really does make a lot of sense, right? okay, if I go to this particular URL or this particular route, I want to show this component on the screen. If the route that a user is looking at does not match up with this path right here, then hey, don't show this component. So let's fill out the implementation right here and see what it looks like inside in practice. So I'm going to say that if a user goes to a route called /hello, I want to show the hello component. And if a user goes to the path goodbye, then I want to show the component goodbye. Okay, so that's really all the setup that we have to do for React Router to at least be able to test it inside the browser. So I'm going to flip over to the browser now. I've already opened up and navigated to localhost 8080. So right now, if we go to localhost 8080, you might see a big error message on here. It says that we may only have one child element. I made a small mistake. We're going to flip back over. You see the browser router right here. So the error message that we just saw said, hey, you can only have one child element. And so really what that's saying is we just have to wrap this entire thing with a standard div, like so. Okay, so I just added a div in, and it's wrapping both of the two routes that we just defined. So let's flip back over now. I'll refresh again, and you'll notice that absolutely nothing appears on the screen. And this actually makes a pretty good amount of sense. If you look at the code that we have right now, we've defined two separate routes, and in each route we said, okay, if the user goes to /hello or /goodbye, then show a component. Otherwise, essentially do nothing at all, show no content on the screen whatsoever. So let's try going to one of those two routes and seeing what happens. I'm going to go up to the address bar and I'll change it to /hello. And when I do so, the application loads up. React Router looks at the URL, or I should say the history library looks at the URL. It passes that route over to React Router. React Router says, oh, okay, it looks like the route is /hello, and that maps up to the hello component, so I'm going to show hello on the screen. So in very similar fashion, we could also go to goodbye, and now we show the goodbye component on the screen instead. We can navigate to just about any other route you could possibly imagine, so we could put in some gibberish here. And when we do so, React Router is just going to say, well, I don't know what to do with this route. I don't have any configuration that matches this gibberish up here, and so I'm going to decide to just show absolutely nothing at all. So that's pretty much React Router in a nutshell. Whenever we go through the setup process, we place the browser router tag, and then we define some number of route components inside of that that pair up or match a given path to a particular component to show on the screen. Now, if we want to show other content on here, maybe a header or something like that, we're still free to mix in as much components or text or anything we could possibly imagine in here along with these route components that we've defined. So maybe if I always want to show a header to the user, I could just hard code a header right above these two route components. So I could just put in the text that says header. Let's go to /hello now. And I get my header appearing on the screen and the text that says hello. And if I go to goodbye, I still see the header, but I also see goodbye. So essentially, we use that route component to just show or hide a child component depending on the URL. Okay, so in this section, we've gone over the basics of React Router with some dummy components, just very simple test components. Let's take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and talk about how to apply this new knowledge to our particular application in the next section.